I never meant to fall for her, my best friend's mother, but some moments rewrite the rules you thought you'd never break. The night she whispered, "If you cross this line, there's no turning back." I realized the line wasn't between us, it was inside me. I used to visit their house so often it felt like a second home, the kind of place where you could drop by unannounced, grab a drink from the fridge, and fall asleep on the couch without judgment. My friend and I had known each other since college, and his mom, Mrs. Hale, had always been part of that comfort. She was warmth personified, calm, graceful, and effortlessly kind. But lately, I'd started noticing things I hadn't before. Noticing her in ways I couldn't quite justify. The first time it hit me was a Sunday afternoon. The house smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, where she stood, tying her hair back. She turned when I entered, smiling that easy, familiar smile. But there was something in that moment, the way the light framed her, the soft trace of weariness in her eyes, the quiet poise she carried, that made me pause. I'd seen her hundreds of times before, yet suddenly, she didn't feel like someone's mother. She felt real. A woman, not just a role. We sat at the table, and she asked about my new job. Her voice carried that mix of curiosity and calm authority that made people open up without realizing it. As I spoke, her eyes held mine, attentive, kind, but also searching. I caught myself lingering too long on the way her fingers curled around the coffee mug, how her laughter seemed to fill the quiet corners of the house. When my friend came downstairs, it was like a spell breaking. I laughed it off, made some joke, and tried to shake the feeling. But something subtle had shifted inside me. That evening, as I walked home, I kept replaying moments I shouldn't have, her voice, her smile, the way she'd brushed a crumb off my sleeve with absent-minded care. Days later, when I came by again, she greeted me with her usual warmth. But beneath her calm, I sensed a hesitation, as if she, too, was aware of something new between us. The air carried it, a faint electricity that hummed beneath casual conversation. I remember standing beside her as she arranged flowers in a vase. Our arms brushed, just barely, but the contact was enough to make my chest tighten. Her scent was soft and familiar, yet it stirred something I couldn't name. She noticed my silence and asked if I was all right. I just smiled and said, "Yeah, just tired." She gave a small nod, her expression unreadable, and returned to the flowers. But I could tell she felt it too, the subtle awareness, the fragile thread between us neither of us wanted to pull. That was the first time I realized there was a line between us, invisible yet undeniable. And though I didn't know it then, every visit, every word, every quiet glance would draw me closer to it, until crossing it became inevitable. It started as a normal day, one of those late summer afternoons when the air feels thick with promise. My friend and I had planned to go out, but a call pulled him away at the last minute, leaving me alone in their house. Mrs. Hale told me to wait until the rain eased up before heading home. I said I'd be fine, but she smiled knowingly and said, "It's not just rain, it's a downpour." Moments later, thunder rolled across the sky, proving her right. The world outside turned gray and shimmering, and inside, the house felt smaller, warmer, like time had slowed down just for the two of us. She disappeared into the kitchen, and a few minutes later, I heard the gentle clink of porcelain. "Chamomile or coffee?" she called out. I hesitated, then answered, "Chamomile." Something about the softness of that word felt right for the moment. When she returned, she carried 2 mugs, steam curling between us. Her hair was loosely pinned, a few strands brushing her cheek. She set the mug in front of me, her fingers grazing mine for the briefest second, a small, accidental touch, but one that sent a quiet pulse through my chest. We talked at first about safe things, work, my friend's stubbornness, the weather. But as the rain deepened outside, our conversation began to shift. She mentioned her old piano, how she used to play before life got too busy. There was a wistfulness in her tone, the kind that carries years of unspoken stories. I asked her what stopped her from playing. She smiled faintly, eyes focused on the raindrops streaking the window. "I think I forgot who I was trying to play for," she said softly. Something about the way she said it stayed with me. It wasn't just sadness, it was honesty. She wasn't performing for anyone, she was simply being real. I wanted to tell her that she didn't need to perform at all, not for anyone, not for me. But the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating her face, calm, elegant, but undeniably human. When the thunder followed, she laughed lightly, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. That simple, natural motion held me captive. After a while, she stood and placed a towel on my shoulders. "You'll catch a cold if you walk home like that," she said, her voice soft but firm. Her hands lingered just a second longer than necessary, and in that moment, I could feel her warmth seep through the thin fabric of my shirt. It wasn't bold. It wasn't wrong. It was just real. When I finally stood to leave, the rain still poured. She opened the door and said, "Be careful, all right?" I nodded, but I hesitated, the kind of hesitation that says everything words can't. She noticed it too. I saw it in her eyes, in the way her breath caught for a moment. As I stepped into the rain, I looked back once. She was still standing there, framed by the soft glow of the living room light, watching quietly. The sound of rain filled the silence between us, heavy, rhythmic, and impossibly intimate. That was the day I realized silence could say more than any confession ever could. Weeks passed, but that rainy afternoon lingered in my mind like a song that wouldn't fade. Every time I visited, I caught glimpses of it, in the way her eyes softened when she saw me, in the quiet moments that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Nothing had changed between us on the surface, yet everything had. Our conversations began to take a different shape. They weren't just polite exchanges anymore. They felt layered, personal, threaded with meaning. Sometimes I'd help her with groceries, or we'd sit on the porch when the evening air was cool. Her son would often be upstairs or out with friends, and those were the moments that felt strangely suspended, as if time itself was waiting to see what we'd do next. She told me stories about her younger years, about the city she once lived in, the art classes she took, the songs she used to love. Her voice would turn wistful when she spoke about dreams she'd once chased, and I found myself wanting to protect that softness in her. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper. She had lived, endured, and learned, and that made her all the more beautiful to me. I remember one afternoon vividly. She was in the kitchen, humming quietly while stirring soup on the stove. I leaned against the doorway, just watching her move. There was a natural grace in the way she did the simplest things, a rhythm, a calmness I didn't know I needed until I found it in her presence. She caught me staring and smiled faintly. "You look lost in thought," she said. "I think I am," I replied, trying to sound casual. Her gaze held mine for a second longer than it should have. Then she turned back to the stove, her shoulders tightening slightly, as if she, too, was aware of the quiet tension weaving between us. Later, as I was leaving, she noticed my collar was uneven. Without a word, she stepped closer and adjusted it. Her fingertips brushed the side of my neck, light as air, but it felt like a spark. I froze, not from fear, but from the overwhelming simplicity of the moment. I could smell her perfume, faint, floral, familiar. Her breath was soft, steady, just inches away. "There," she murmured, smoothing the fabric, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, and for a heartbeat I almost forgot where we stood, who she was supposed to be. She stepped back quickly, her composure returning like a curtain closing over a stage. "Good luck tomorrow," she said, referring to my upcoming interview. Her tone was warm but guarded. As I walked home, the memory of her touch stayed with me, not as something forbidden, but as something true. I knew it wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something else, something deeper that neither of us dared to name. And in that fragile in-between space, the line that separated us began to blur, not because of any single act, but because of all the moments we didn't stop soon enough. It happened on a quiet Saturday evening, the kind of evening when the world seems to exhale. Her son had gone on a weekend trip, and I'd dropped by to return a book she had lent me. I told myself I'd stay only a few minutes, but time has a way of bending around certain people. The house was softly lit, warm and familiar. She was in the living room, a record spinning on the old player beside her. The sound was low, a timeless melody that wrapped itself around the silence. When she saw me, her face lit up in surprise, then softened. "You didn't have to come tonight," she said. "I was passing by," I lied gently. She laughed, not her usual polite one, but something real. "Then I suppose you'll have to sit for a minute, or it'll seem rude." We sat across from each other, the book between us on the table, untouched. The conversation drifted effortlessly, from my interview to the changing weather, to nothing and everything at once. Somewhere between her laughter and the soft hum of music, the air began to shift. It wasn't sudden, it was slow, deliberate, as if the universe itself had taken a breath and decided to watch what would happen next. She poured us each a small glass of wine. The scent of it, rich, dark, and earthy, mingled with the faint trace of her perfume. The flicker of the lamp painted her skin in gold, and for the first time, I saw not the image I'd built in my head, but the woman in front of me, vulnerable, graceful, alive. "I haven't listened to this record in years," she said, her voice quieter now. "I used to dance to it when I thought no one was watching." "Then dance?" I said before I could stop myself. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "And who would I be dancing for now?" There was a pause, long enough for both of us to feel the weight of it. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The air between us was fragile, trembling with everything unspoken. She stood and took a slow step closer. "You're kind," she said softly. "Too kind to understand what you're doing." "I understand," I whispered. Her gaze searched mine, not for desire, but for truth. Then she said it, the words that would stay with me forever. "If you cross this line, there's no turning back." Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, fingers trembling slightly as she held the edge of the table for balance. I didn't move closer. I didn't speak. But the silence between us pulsed with something raw and honest, the quiet ache of two people standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything. After a long pause, she looked away and exhaled. "You should go," she said gently. I nodded, but my feet felt heavy, unwilling. As I turned toward the door, I could still feel her eyes on me, a silent plea, a quiet warning, and maybe a hint of hope. That night I didn't sleep. Her words echoed in my mind, over and over, not as a threat, but as a truth. Because deep down, I knew, the line had already been crossed, not with touch, but with feeling. After that night, everything changed, not in an obvious way, but in the quiet spaces between words. There were no confessions, no arguments, no dramatic scenes. Just silence. Heavy, deliberate silence that hung in the air like a storm that refused to break. I didn't visit as often after that. Partly because I thought I should give her space, partly because I didn't trust myself not to say something I couldn't take back. When I did come by, she greeted me with the same warmth as before, but it was practiced now, careful, like someone walking across thin ice. The house felt different too. The music was never playing anymore. The laughter, once easy and effortless, was replaced by polite conversation and a faint echo of what we used to share. She'd busy herself with small tasks, folding laundry, tending to her plants, asking about my work without really looking at me. One afternoon, I arrived to drop off something her son had asked for. She opened the door with a tired smile. "You didn't have to come all the way," she said softly. I shrugged, trying to sound light. "I was in the neighborhood." It was the same lie as before, but it landed differently this time. She thanked me and turned to place the item on the counter. For a second, I thought she might say something, maybe about that night, maybe about the silence that had followed. But she didn't. Instead, she asked if I wanted tea. I said yes, just to stay a little longer. We sat across from each other again, but the air was colder now. She stirred her tea slowly, her eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. "How's work?" she asked. "It's fine," I replied. "Busy. That's good." she said, nodding. The conversation ended there, not with words, but with exhaustion. There was so much I wanted to say. I wanted to tell her that I missed her laughter, the way she'd look at me like she could see straight through the noise of the world. I wanted to tell her that even though nothing had happened, everything had. As I left, I saw her through the kitchen window, sleeves rolled up, tending to her plants. The evening sun fell softly on her face, highlighting the quiet strength in her features. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, just watching her. She looked up suddenly, as if she could feel me there. Our eyes met, and for an instant, time stopped. In that look, there was everything: apology, longing, restraint, love. Then she turned away first, pretending to fix a leaf, pretending she hadn't seen me at all. I walked home that evening feeling hollow. The streets were full of life, people laughing, cars passing, but I felt detached, like I was walking through a world that didn't belong to me anymore. What we'd shared wasn't a mistake, but it was something we both didn't know how to carry. And so we carried it apart, silently, painfully, pretending we hadn't already lost something we never truly had. It had been weeks since I'd last seen her, weeks of deliberate silence that felt like punishment for something neither of us had done. I told myself it was for the best, that time and distance would restore the normalcy we'd both lost. But late one evening, as I passed her street, I saw her porch light still on. Something about that faint, familiar glow drew me in. I told myself I was only returning the book she'd lent me months ago, but deep down, I knew I just wanted to see her again. When she opened the door, she looked startled, not unkindly, but as if she'd seen a ghost she'd once cared for. She was wearing a soft cardigan, her hair loose, her expression tired. "You shouldn't have come this late," she said quietly, though her voice lacked conviction. "I know," I admitted, holding up the book. "I just wanted to return this." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. "You might as well come in." The house was dimly lit, warm but lonely. A clock ticked softly from the hallway, and somewhere in the distance, the rain had begun again, a quiet echo of that afternoon months ago. She poured a cup of tea, then one for me, and we sat across from each other at the same kitchen table that had witnessed every shift in our story. "I've missed this," I said, almost under my breath. She looked up, eyes tired but gentle. "What exactly is this?" I swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. "Talking to you. Being here. Feeling understood." Her gaze faltered, and she let out a slow, steady breath. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Maybe not," I said, "but I mean them." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy, almost tender. She looked down at her hands, fingers tightening around the edge of her mug. "Do you know how long it's been since someone said something to me and meant it?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. I shook my head. Her eyes met mine again, those same eyes that had once felt like home and danger all at once. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said softly. "You just reminded me what it feels like to be seen." I didn't plan what happened next. It was instinct, quiet, gentle. I reached across the table and brushed away the tear that had escaped down her cheek. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Her hand rose slowly, hesitantly, and covered mine. Her skin was warm, trembling, human. Neither of us spoke. There was no need to. Everything that had gone unsaid for months was there, in that touch, the regret, the longing, the gratitude. "I never wanted to make things complicated," I murmured. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "You didn't," she said. "You just made me feel alive again." The rain outside deepened, tapping against the windows like a quiet heartbeat. When I finally stood to leave, she followed me to the door. I could feel her presence close behind me, familiar, comforting, but no longer forbidden. As I stepped into the night, I realized something had changed. The silence that had once divided us now felt peaceful. What we'd shared wasn't a mistake. It was a confession, one made not in words, but in the quiet honesty of two souls who finally stopped pretending. Months passed. Life, as it always does, began to move forward, quietly, steadily, without permission. I found a new job in another part of town, new routines, new faces. The sharpness of what had happened between us softened with time, yet she lingered somewhere in the background of every calm moment, like the faint scent of rain long after the storm has gone. I hadn't planned on seeing her again. There were days I convinced myself that what we shared was just a passing moment, a brief connection between two lonely hearts that had drifted too close. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. What we shared wasn't born from chance. It was born from truth, quiet, painful, and beautiful. One afternoon, months later, I stopped by a small cafe near the art gallery downtown. It was the kind of place where the world seemed to slow down. Soft music, old books on shelves, sunlight spilling through dusty windows. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard a familiar laugh. I turned, and there she was. Mrs. Hale, but not quite the same woman I remembered. She looked lighter somehow. Her hair was shorter, styled neatly, and her clothes carried the casual confidence of someone who had found peace. She was standing by the counter, smiling at something the barista had said. When her eyes met mine, she froze, just for a second, then smiled, that same warm, grounding smile I'd missed. "Of all the places," she said softly when she walked over. I laughed, trying to steady the rush in my chest. "Seems like we keep meeting when we're not supposed to." She sat across from me, and for a while, we just talked. About simple things, her new volunteer work, the art classes she'd started taking again, my job. There was an ease between us now, a calm acceptance of what we'd been through. The tension was gone, replaced by something gentler, respect, understanding, and a kind of love that didn't need to be spoken aloud. At one point, she glanced out the window, watching the late afternoon light fade. "You seem happier," she said. "I think I am," I replied. "You look free." She smiled, not with sadness, but gratitude. "Maybe we both needed to find a way forward." "Separately." I nodded. She reached across the table then, her hand resting on mine, not trembling, not hesitant this time. "Just steady. Some lines," she said quietly, "aren't meant to be walls." Her touch was brief but full of meaning, a goodbye, a blessing, a thank you all at once. When she stood to leave, I didn't stop her. I simply watched her walk out into the fading light, her silhouette merging with the world outside, not lost, just continuing. As the door closed behind her, I realized something. The line we'd once been afraid to cross had never truly separated us. It had only shown us where honesty begins, where connection, however fleeting, can change two lives without breaking either. And though she was gone, I smiled. Because for a little while, we hadn't just crossed the line, we'd turned it into a bridge.